Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Fight Side interview. Today, I have the absolute honor and pleasure of interviewing Tyson Chartier, the head coach for the New England Cartel, a team and we're all really big fans of. So, Tyson, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. Happy to have you here.
Thanks, man. I'm happy to jump on, and it's nice to finally hear your voice rather than just seeing you type.
Appreciate it. Well, hopefully it's one that's easy to listen to. So the first question I actually want to ask you is something that I mean, it's a recent addition to your Instagram. You got to meet a legend. You got to meet Dale from Detroit Urban Survival Training, and I kind of want to know what that was like, and if he gave you any tricks or tips on how to increase your survivability.
No, man, it was so he was staying on the same floor with us. Buckley was on the same floor as Parker Porter, and it was like us, Buckley, and I think Pierce was on our floor, I think, and maybe Jim Miller. So he was on like the same hallway as me, and I kept joking around with the guys in our room, like, guys, we don't have to lock our doors anymore. Like, this is the safest hotel in the United States. And they're all like, they keep locking the doors because they're from Hartford. Like, bro, we lock our door all the time. Like, you don't have to. Like, Dale's got us. Commander Brown has got. He's down the hall. And then I asked their coaches. I think it was a couple days we were there, and I was like, is he really coming? And like, yeah, no, he's upstairs. I was like, I gotta meet him. And then they saw me the next day. They're like, oh, he's down here. So I came down and I was like, hey man, like Rob Font told me if I see you, I have to get a picture. So I went and got a picture, and then he's like, hey man, text it to me. So I texted to him, he put up on his Instagram, and honestly, it was like he was super nice, super humble. Like I think on his Instagram, he comes off as like one of those guys that's gonna try to like, almost like Steven Seagal you. Like he's gonna come up to you and be like, here's what I think you should do. And it wasn't like that at all. He was like there. He was enjoying the ride, like soaking it all in as a first UFC fight week. And then he even Buckley was in the same locker room as us. He fought right before we did. He was in the locker room. I looked over just because I was kind of curious how it would go. And he was sitting, being quiet, just like waiting to be told what to do. He knew he was kind of just there, probably more PR than anything. Is I don't think they were really like looking for him to give advice in the corner, but I think he knew his role, and he was just like soaking it up and enjoying it. Just like anybody who's a fan of MMA, it doesn't matter how you get there. If you get to walk out and be in a corner in the UFC at the Apex, like why wouldn't you do it? And so he was like super respectful the whole week. I don't think he did anything to try to make the week about him. And obviously I wasn't in the hotel rooms with them, but for everything I witnessed, he was like a super humble guy, just, appreciative of everything he has, and very, very like nice, like texted me after the fight and said like, congratulations, good win, stuff like that. So, super respectful. Told us if we're ever in Detroit, stop in, we'll get some training, and that would be fun. But yeah, no, I think honestly, like, I think everybody expects him to be some sort of like arrogant guy who's gonna know it all or something like that. And it couldn't have been further from like what I witnessed. Like I said, I don't live in Detroit. I don't train with the guy or anything, but everything I witnessed, all the things I would look for as red flags from coaches, he didn't have those. He was there. He was being quiet. He was following the other coaches' leads, and wasn't making it about him at all.
Yeah, that actually, it's interesting because that actually kind of confirms what I already thought I knew based on what I was just seeing from people who actually like went down and did some Detroit Urban Survival Training and did videos on it. He's pretty much a lot. Obviously, the Instagram doesn't show that much. So the little reels, they're 60-second clips. But he openly admits like this is not something you should be doing as like your first, this takes years of training and all that stuff. So he's open and honest about what he's teaching. So that's actually good to hear that confirmed. So yeah, let's just jump into learning more about you, because you fought yourself. You've been around MMA gyms forever, and I know that you were both, as a fighter, as a coach in a gym, and then running your own. Can you talk to me about, I guess, how did you get into it, first of all, so people can know how you got started and progression from fighter to coach to just running your own team actually as the head coach?
Yeah, so I was a high school wrestler. Freshman year, I just decided I'd join the wrestling team because my older brother was a junior in the high school wrestling team. The high school got wrestling. That was the first year they ever had it. So I went in and I joined the wrestling team, and wrestled all 4 years. Then after, went to college, played lacrosse. In grad school, I stayed and got my MBA. I was doing the recruiting for the lacrosse team, and I was an assistant coach. And I finished that, and I was just like bored. So I was like, well, what should I do? I tried jiu-jitsu down in Mass, I was down in Danvers, Mass, and I just tried it. I liked it, and one of my training partners was getting ready for a fight. He asked me if I'd spar. I didn't know what sparring was, and I was like, "Sure, I'll do that." And next thing you know, he asked me to corner him for his fight because I was a wrestler and he was fighting a ground guy. And so I went out and I walked him out for his fight. This was like 2006. I walked him out for a fight. He got armbarred in the first round. But then I was like, "Oh, I'd love to do this one time," you know. And but backtrack, fun, interesting story. I don't really talk about a lot, but I think I took my first jiu-jitsu class. I was like, oh, I like the UFC. I was watching the UFC. I watched a couple of pay-per-views or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'd love to try jiu-jitsu. And then, so I went down to jiu-jitsu school, did my first class. And then the next day I was going to Vegas for the 4th of July. And on the way home from Vegas, Dana White was in front of me at the airport getting on the plane. So like I didn't even know his name was Dana White. That's how new to the UFC I was. So I tapped him on the shoulder. I just saw an Ultimate Fighter bag. I was like, "Oh, do you fight?" And he turned. I was like, "Oh, it's you." But I didn't even know his name. I just knew he was the guy that ran the UFC. And so he's like, "Oh, it's cool," And then I went and sat down in my seat. I was in the aisle. My girlfriend at the time was in the middle seat. And then Dana comes in and he was sitting right next to us. He was going back to Maine for a funeral or something. So he was sitting in economy. And I talked his ear out for 5 hours. I was like the new troll, like the dumb questions, like just asking all the rookie questions that people ask me now. And I was probably like a really annoying, but he was super nice about it the whole time. But by the end of the trip, he was like, "Hey, listen, call Donna." And Donna's actually Donna Marcolini. She runs the USADA program for the UFC now. So I have extensive relationship with her. But this is back when Donna was like Dana's assistant or secretary. I don't really know what her role was. Because they called Donna, she'll set you up with tickets for the UFC next week. They were having a pay-per-view. It was Arlovsky versus Tim Sylvia 2, I think. And he's like, "Get back out here next weekend. I'll get you tickets for the fight. Like you can come to the after party." And so then I went back out the next weekend. I watched my first UFC fight, and I was like, I got to do one of these. Like I just wanted to fight once, not in UFC. And that's how I kind of got into the MMA stuff. And then anyway, fast forward, I was doing fights myself out of a BJJ school, and really was the only one fighting. And then I started going to another school to learn striking, and I was fighting out of there. And I just started making friends with my teammates. I was a little bit older than them. I was probably like 27, 28. They were like 22, 23. And they were all white belts that had okay striking. I was a wrestler who was a purple belt, and I already had 3 fights under me, and none of them had fought yet. So I was getting myself fights, and they were like, "Can you get me a fight too?" And I was like, "Okay, cool." So that's how I started becoming like a manager. And then they were like, "Can you help me with this? Can you help me with this?" And then as I'm sparring with them, like none of them had any takedown defense. They didn't have great jiu-jitsu. So I was like always just helping my friends. And then that turned into, "Can you corner me?" Oh, and then because I was a wrestler, "Can you help me cut weight?" And next thing you know, like I'm booking all the fights, I'm running all the fight practices, I'm cornering all the fighters, I'm traveling around everywhere just to corner these fighters. And then that's really how it happened. I just became a coach organically. I was fighting myself, but I was running everybody else's camps without officially being called a coach or anything. And that went on for probably 8 years. And then probably 4 years ago, Rob was like, "Hey, listen, I'm ready to make a move. Like, what do you think about doing our own thing? And you being the head coach, we'll start our own thing. Like, you figure it out." And I chewed on it for a couple of weeks, and I came up with the idea of like what we're doing now with the cartel is small group training, only a few fighters, surrounded by the best coaches and the best training partners, and go all in on a couple guys. I guess you could say it's kind of like that team takedown approach that they had back with Mark Lehman when, what's his name? Big Rig was doing that, and him and Shane Roller and those guys. Yeah. Similar to that probably, but yeah, just trying to bring in like more well-rounded guys. We're not just wrestlers, we get some wrestlers, some jiu-jitsu guys, some boxers, stuff like that. So yeah, and that was my theory. I was like, I really think we can chase belts for Rob and Calvin. And if we build camps around them and not building their camps around the gym. And so that was the whole idea behind it. And, then people kind of laughed at us, but that strategy won't work. You need more training partners. You need a deeper mat. You go down to ATT, they have 50 UFC fighters on the mat. It's like, well, that's cool, but like anybody who's in the UFC is already tough. Like we know if you get to the UFC, you're tough. I think that's what's for young fighters being around that many UFC fighters. It can build a certain like level of toughness, and you kind of get to take your licks and learn how to be frustrated, learn how to get beat up and all that. But once these guys are in the UFC, it's not about being tough. It's about getting better. And, you get better by having the best coaches focus on a couple fighters. And like I said, people laughed at us at first, said it would never work. And then all of a sudden, like little by little, it, we started having success. And then the pandemic hit. And I think that really like was like serendipitous in a weird way, because everybody else had to start training like we did and they didn't know how. So then all of a sudden I have all these coach friends that were laughing at me before, calling me up like, how do you do this? What do you do? And then, I have coach friends that are like, dude, this is hard. Like I have to basically do my normal schedule. Like I had to have like, fight practices like that, but now I have to do it like 20 different times with all these different fighters. I was like, yeah, it's not scalable. You can't coach 20 UFC fighters and get the level of care that I'm giving. Like you can't do it, So it's it's a sacrifice that I'm making in terms of like probably financially. If there's UFC fighters all the time that say, hey, I want to come out to Boston, I want to train with you guys. I'm like, sorry, that's not what we're doing. Like, I made a commitment to Rob and Calvin a few years ago that like I'm going to go all in on you two and we're going to chase the UFC belts, ideally two of them. And that's not going to happen if I just keep trying to grow the team with a bunch of UFC fighters so I can be constantly cornering UFC fighters and, making more money and all that stuff. It's an agreement that we made a few years ago. We all understood like what the sacrifices were going to be. And I expect 100% effort out of them and buy into the process. And they know that in return, they have 100% of my attention.
Mhm. It seems like you've kind of like almost followed the boxing model with
Right.
regard to how these camps are set up, where it's entirely focused on, in this case, Calvin and Rob, as opposed to one specific type of champion or whatever it is. But we've seen that model of success work in boxing over a century. So for people to laugh at it, it's something that should have been discussed already with regard to these high level champions already and high level fighters for years now. And so it is good to see you guys breaking that mold and showing that it can lead to successful results. Speaking of successful results, obviously, Calvin had that most recent fight against Giga Chikadze, and he looked great doing it. We definitely saw some new wrinkles to his game, but there was obviously that Max Holloway fight before that, and there was that long break that you guys took. I know that there was a deliberate spacing between those fights. So I guess talk to me about, after the Holloway fight, what you guys did to go back to the drawing board, what kind of adjustments you kind of made, and what your thought process for how long you wanted before the next fight.
Well, coming out of that fight, Calvin wanted to go for a jog the next morning. Like he's a savage, He's like, can I jog? So the compromise, he went and rode a stationary bike while we worked out. We had to stay 5 more days in Abu Dhabi and just sit around. Like it's boring. And so he sat on a stationary bike and just really low. Like we kept his heart rate under a certain amount. We leveraged the Performance Institute on concussion protocols and all that stuff. And then, they came up with some timelines and I was way more, I don't know if you'd say cautious or aggressive, whichever it was. I was more aggressive with the layoff.
Right.
I was, like my goal was to get a long layoff. So I was aggressive about that. And I was like, listen, we don't have to fight for a year. I was like, at the earliest we fight in the fall. I go, but like, you're not doing any sort of contact for 6 months. And not that, he didn't get knocked down in that fight. It's a cumulative effect. He took a lot of shots and honestly, like he was like way more lucid after that fight than some fighters I've cornered in the past that come out winning, but they got rocked in a fight and, they got like kind of messed up. But for some reason it's more socially acceptable for those guys to jump right back in and no one questions it because they won. But the way the fight happened and all that is like, I just thought like, listen, like you've been in camp for like 3 years straight. We went from camp to camp to camp to camp to camp, which one, it's like, you don't get a rest. All these little nagging injuries ding, he went in the last two, the Ige fight and the Holloway fight with a messed up hand and a broken nose. Like, you're limping into these fights and you're not at 100%, but it takes time to heal those things. You got to take time off. And if you're taking time off, you're not getting better and you're not going to be ready for a fight. So we were just constantly in camp for 3 years. It was a great opportunity for us to take the foot off the gas pedal, put our foot firmly on the brake and say, hey, listen, now we're going to fill those holes in the boat. And like, it's not like there was no secret to like things that we needed to get better at, but we were getting by with what we were doing. And, you just run into a guy like Max and he's going to expose those holes to make them even bigger than they seemed before. So it was like, we didn't fight how we wanted to in that fight. And that's really, kudos to Max and his team for coming in with a great plan and executing before we were able to get our game plan off. And then he just took the momentum and ran with it. But as far as the time off, like I said, 6 months, no contact at all. Like, we were like, it was a tiered approach where he'd go in and he was allowed to start, like, he could lift light, and then he could, eventually he could start jogging, and then he could like do some like shadow boxing and stuff like that. And then we got into, now you can get on the mat, but no getting hit. Now you can hit mitts, but no wrestling yet. Now you can flow jiu-jitsu, but let's not go live, and we just kept like increasing the workload to, I think he didn't take the first punch to the head that he finally took was in October. So that was a solid 10 months that he didn't get touched, and, there's no, this is like a feel. There's no like science behind like, well, if you get hit this many times, this is how much you need off before it affects your head negatively, or that your chin's not going to be affected, or this and that. Like, who knows? Like, no one knows. There's no like right or wrong way to do it. So the cautious way wasn't going to hurt. He's not going to get better with more time off. I mean, he's not going to get worse with more time off to rest, and he's just going to keep getting better, technically. So that was the plan. I thought in a perfect world, we waited a year, and it ended up being like a year and one day that we fought after, and we didn't take any shots for 10 months. So I think it was, and obviously because we won, it looked like it worked out, right?
Right, of course.
But whether we won that fight or not, I think the move is to take that time off. He'd been in camp for so long. He needed a break. His hand's great now. His nose is great. And you look at some of the new wrinkles, like you said, that he added in that fight. And those are things that he was always capable of. They just weren't triggers that were built in yet. And now it's like going into that fight, everybody's like, oh, just push him backwards. He can't fight moving backwards, this and that. And now it's like, what do you do to Calvin? Like, you're going to wait and let him go first? You're screwed. You're going to push him backwards? Good luck with that now. Like, so it's kind of like, we're still evolving as a fighter. It's, his 10th, 11th fight in UFC. You see a lot of guys get to that top 5, and they're kind of like the same. Like, they want to break a video down on guys, and they kind of fight the same when their 10th UFC fight as they did in the 5th, And I think Calvin, he's been showing new things every time, the evolution. Like 9 months before the Stevens fight, he didn't have an elbow trigger. We brought in a different Muay Thai coach. I said, hey, this is what I need. He doesn't have that trigger. 9 months later, he's doing it against Jeremy Stevens in a fight, knocking him out with an elbow. Going into the UFC, it was, his nickname was the Boston Finisher, and we kind of joked around that he's the Boston Decisioner. And and then we brought in a different coach. I said, listen, like he's landing a lot of shots, but he's not hurting anybody. Like, his feet aren't underneath him. Like, we need to work on this. We need to work on like landing more powerful shots and having our feet underneath us, bringing our feet with us when we enter. And then he went on a run and got like 3 or 4 finishes, So you see him evolving in the UFC. He's literally growing up in the UFC.
So it's actually interesting that you talk about those triggers, right? And that it's like he had those tools, or he knew what to do. It's just that it wasn't triggered into his game so that he would utilize those things. And like specifically for the site, we saw him doing a lot of things actually that, we'll see Rob do in fights. Like, he was grabbing off the jab and playing off that front kick, just more like consistent with the pressure and volume. So it is really interesting that you mentioned that trigger, because I actually am going to use the Fiziev RDA fight being called off, and people talking about him, just like, why wouldn't he accept a fight against Islam, because he's been in camp this whole time. So how important is it, just so you can explain to people who might have those kinds of questions, like, he's coming off a full camp, why can't he accept a short notice fight? How important is it to be kind of like training opponent specific? Because Fiziev is a completely different fighter than someone like Moicano even, or who he's fighting in the end. How important is that? Yeah.
I think it's crucial. Like, there's a balance though, because there always is that potential of the opponent switch. So it's got to be like 60%, 60, 70% of what we do is going to be the same for every fight. Like, we have our meat and potatoes, we have our strength and conditioning. We'll tailor that slightly depending on who we're fighting. But the other, 30, 40%, that's really tailored to the opponent. Certain positions you're going to drill, certain triggers you're going to look for, certain like defense you're going to work on, certain like moves you're going to work on defending, certain moves you're going to work on because they can't defend, different things like getting off the cage, holding someone on the cage, all that stuff, depending on who you're fighting, is going to be very like specific to that camp. And then there's certain styles that like can take one out, insert the other. It's not that big of a deal. But when you're looking at the RDA fight, like Fiziev, and take out the marathon runner and insert the sprinter. Like, you weren't training for a sprint. You know, it's like, okay, cool, they're both running. We were not training to a 100-yard dash. You're going to get smoked there. And that's because, and I'm sure that you could be that guy in a 100-yard dash, but not without practice. You know, the chances are drastically reduced when you go from fighting a guy that's probably going to stand with you for 5 rounds to then on a week's notice, go to a guy that is just going to grab you and hang on you for 5 rounds until he gets on top, goes to mount, you give up your back and you look for a choker, TKOs you. That's different. You know, those are way different cardio systems, muscular systems, like different triggers that you're going into that fight. Like that's a frustrating fight that you see. Everybody that fights those guys, like Khabib and Makhachev, they break mentally. Eventually you see it. They put up a fight and then they're kind of, ugh. You kind of see it. They get that puff and then they're deflated and they lose. Like that, you have to train that. Like 6, 8, 12 weeks. You have to get that guy frustrated every day at practice. So he feels that, and then you push him further. You know, he needs to understand that little voice in his head, the bitch voice, is going to tell him to give up. And he needs to train that voice. You don't just tell that guy, oh, I'm mentally strong, I'm not going to quit. Everybody in that position will quit eventually. But with a long camp against that type of fighter, being put, you know, in those positions, you're going to be able to go longer. And kudos to RDA and his camp for kind of pushing back a little bit, not just accepting that, because obviously that would be awesome for the UFC if he just jumped in and fought him and didn't have to cut weight and this and that. So I think it was, I know if I was in RDA's team position, I would have said the same thing. You know, it didn't make sense.
So jumping off that, one of the things that, you know, we're talking about adjustments post-fight, and, you know, Rob himself, every single time that he's had a setback or, you know, every single time that he's had a performance where, you know, things didn't go the way that you guys wanted it to, you guys have always made adjustments and he's come back looking better than ever. The Aldo fight, I mean, it's Jose Aldo. He's one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time. What kind of adjustments do you feel that could be made, or have you guys been working on since that fight with Rob? Because, you know, we saw that with Calvin after the Max fight. So what kind of stuff are you working on to, I guess, address any concerns or things that you saw were not working in that fight?
You know, it's not anything like crazy, because if you look at that fight, like, we did very well.
Oh yeah,
that one shot he landed at the end of the first round rocked Rob, and then after that there were so many punches that Rob didn't even see coming, and then you don't wear those as well, and it looked a lot worse. And you know, but the reality is, like, we were the ones that broke our eye in the first round and were rocked and kind of like woozy the rest of the fight, but yet he still had to wrestle us, you know, like, and that's not a knock. Like, good for, he fought smart, he fought great, he's a legend. But even a wobbly Rob, not 100% coherent with what's going on, still took it to Jose Aldo, came back, broke his eye, and still made him wrestle. You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of takeaways from that fight mentally that you grow from that as a confidence for Rob, confidence as our team. You know, I think we had a great game plan in that fight. I think if we don't get hit by that punch in the end of the first round, I think we break him in the second. You know, who knows? But we did get hit by that punch in the first round. So how do we make that not happen again? And that's where we go back, we watch the tape, and we got to fill in that hole. Because if you look at some of Rob's fight, that's happened a couple of times. You know, Pedro Munoz rocked him a little bit, and then he shot and got guillotined. Lineker caught us early. So, you know, we have to fill in those holes, you know, and I think a lot of it just comes down to, like, learning from those experiences and, like, just tightening everything up a little bit. Like, you know, we'll work on the defense, obviously, you know, that stuff. But on the mental side, it's every time you climb to the top, you get to the UFC, the margin of error is slim. Then you get to the top 15, it's a little slimmer. Then the top 10. And then once you get to the top 5, it's as thin as it gets. But then now you're fighting the top 5 and you're fighting a legend. Like, there's no margin of error. It's literally like, whoever makes the first mistake, it's usually grave consequences. And I think if you go back and look at the Cody Garbrandt fight, we landed the first bigger shot. That teep kick we landed in the first round really had an effect on him, and I think he was hesitant the rest of the fight. Like, it's like those little moments in fights that it's kind of whoever makes the first mistake. And, you know, unfortunately, he capitalized on one mistake. We stood in the mirror a little bit too long, you know, and I think the takeaway from that fight is, like, listen, like, it's always our turn there's never a point where he feels like, okay, he stopped, now I can go. I think we just got to be, we're going or we're not there, and that's a lesson. That's a tough lesson to learn. It's an expensive lesson to learn, but the glass is going to always be half full. And we got to look at, the positive takeaways from that fight is the fact that, we made the first mistake and still made it a fight. Like, I know it was 50-45 or whatever, but like we doubled his, we landed 2 times more strikes than he landed on us. And we were still kind of, like I said, not the most coherent. We hurt him too. He hurt us. Like, we forced Jose Aldo to wrestle, which is a compliment, yeah, and I also think that was a good Jose Aldo. Like that was it. Jose didn't gas like he normally would in the past. So kudos to him for coming in like really prepared. And I think next time you see Rob come back, like you said, he generally comes back off a loss like with a vengeance. And it's been a while since he lost, but he usually comes back and performs after either a layoff, an injury, loss, whatever. He usually comes back really, really sharp and hungry. And he's always hungry, but it's like that extra chip on your shoulder when you're coming off a loss.
I actually want to touch on 2 things based on what you just said. And one of this is seizing the initiative or taking the initiative in a fight and how important that is, whether fighting off the back foot, front foot, whatever the game plan is. And also a quick comparison, fighting after knowing that you can be hurt by your opponent versus, Calvin basically being unkillable, it seems. How much does it matter to a fighter going in there and knowing like you can hit me with your best shots and I'm going to be fine. Calvin took tremendous shots from Giga and was totally fine, and just continued to proceed with the game plan and build off it and continue to make adjustments as they came. As opposed to knowing that your opponent can hurt you, I imagine, like you said, and you're woozy and the actual physical toll, but also the mental toll. How do you approach those 2 things as a coach in the corner? And then the second question is seizing that initiative and never letting it go in the fight.
Yeah. So the first one is how do you coach past like a fighter that thinks he can't get hurt? Is like, I think when the fighter thinks he can't get hurt, you have to remind him that he can get hurt because like a reckless fighter is that's risky, And I mean, when you look, we were dominating that fight and going into the 5th round, I was like yelling at Calvin, like, I think I said, like, go get in a knife fight, like you can't play around with this kid. And that was in reference to like the whole camp. The theory was like, this guy's coming to the fight with a sword. We have a knife. Like, let's not hang out at sword range. Let's get in his face and get in a knife fight because he's not going to be as good there. And we didn't want him taking the foot off the gas pedal and feeling safe. Like, yeah, he probably could have just stood and got kicked for 5 minutes and still won. But you want to have him keep the foot on the gas pedal and go, even though he thinks like he's fine. He hasn't hurt me in 20 minutes. Why would he hurt me in 25? I can kind of just go, no, you need to stay in kill mode because that's where you're working. That's where you're doing good. Don't give him a chance. Like, he's treading water, keep pushing him down. And if the fighter knows they can get hurt and they have got hurt, you just got to remind them, like, listen, like, let's play in the part of the sandbox that we don't get hurt or we have a less of a chance of getting hurt. It's like, hey, listen, if you stand there and he hurts you, like, you're going to keep getting hurt. So why not go forward? If you don't go forward, you're going to get hurt more, And I think that's what you see. They get hurt and then they kind of get gun shy. They're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I would say you got to like, remember the movie with Wilson and Tom Hanks? He had the ball Wilson. He was like captive or whatever it was. And it just took him forever to get the nerve to like build the raft and get over the coral reef to get to the calm seas because he's worried about getting tipped over and all that. I would say it's like you got to get past the reef, Like if you don't go past the reef, you're just gonna get fucking beat up, So you might as well face it head on, go through the fire, go past the reef, and get into the calm waters, and that's where you can stand a chance. So it's like there's a lot of that goes on in camp. It's like you can't wait here, you got to go. Like you can stay here. Yeah, I understand you're worried about getting hurt if you move forward, but if you don't move forward, you're definitely getting hurt. So you might as well just try to hurt him. There's a little bit of that. It's tough because you gotta recognize and like acknowledge the facts that they can always get hurt. And I remember we had a big epiphany after the what's his Munoz fight. When Rob was like taking it to Munoz, piecing him up. Munoz shot on him. He threw him down and he backed up and his demeanor changed. And we were talking after, and we're like, what happened? And he's like, hey, listen, he shot on me and I threw him down. I was like, oh, this kid can't touch me. And that was like, and that's not like Rob didn't do anything wrong. Like he was like confident. He's like, oh, okay, I'm good. But then all of a sudden, like Munoz came forward with a big shot and rocked him, and Rob shot him and got guillotine. And it's like, and I remember I said to him in the hotel in Brazil, I'm like, listen, like, this is the top 15 in the UFC. From minute 1 to minute 15, these guys can all hurt you. You know, he's like, you're right, you know. And then the next camp, Rob did everything for 15 minutes. It was like, I'm going to do this for 15 minutes. It's like he was prepared to go for 15 minutes. And then, you know, it's little lessons like that that you learn. And, you know, and then we learned that a little bit in the Aldo fight. You know, we kind of had momentum, we're piecing him up. But then you let your guard down for that one little second, and then he sees his window, like a legend like that, who's as quick as he is, and you know, as experienced as he is, that's all he needed, you know. And so the next fight will come back, and we'll be a little bit more prepared. Like we'll be better at preparing him, and he'll come in more prepared, you know, because it's on us just as much as it's on the fighter. And hopefully he'll come out that next time, and there won't be that window. Whether or not he fights Jose Aldo 5 more times, or if he fights Sandhagen or whoever, you know, it doesn't matter. It's like, hopefully that window's closed now, and they're gonna have to find a different one in. So then the other question was
the importance of initiative in the fight. That essentially that initiative doesn't necessarily mean like you're constantly going forward necessarily, but just making sure that you're controlling the initiative in a fight, and how important that is, and how you, I guess, drill that into your fighters.
I think either they're leading the dance or you are, you know, like who, and if you're leading the dance, you generally got momentum, you know, and momentum's huge in fighting. Momentum gives you energy, or lack of momentum gives you anxiety, you know, and stress. And now you're getting tired, and you're getting beat up, and then you can just see it in the body language. When people have momentum in a fight, the judges feel that, the crowd feels that, the corners feel that, the fighter feels it, and it compounds fast, you know. And so our whole thing is just like we're leaving the dance, whether it be going forward, going backwards, or it be wrestling, or it be kickboxing. It doesn't matter. Like if we're doing something, it's because we want to do it. You know, he doesn't get a chance to play his game. He's going to play our game. And we've just spent 8-12 weeks honing our skills and being conditioned to play our game. So as long as they're playing our game, I always say to the guys is like, I'll go all in. You know, I think I said about the Giga fight to Calvin, I was like, listen, like, you know, let's go forward. And he's like, you know, well, what if he doesn't go backwards? I'm just going to be there in a slugfest. And I was like, that's fine. I go, against Giga, I will go all in. I'll bet the whole house on you standing in boxing range and winning those exchanges against him. And that obviously that proved to be correct. But that's my belief in Calvin based on his skill set and seeing Giga and his skill set and what he's done in the past. It made sense to assume that if this guy wants to stand in the middle and slug fists with us, we probably should have the advantage, you know. But if we wanted to stand and kickbox with him, he'd probably have the advantage. So I think those are like the things that we work on and kind of how we approach that. I don't even know if I answered your question. I rambled. So.
No, that's fantastic, because it's actually, I wanted to quickly just, I guess, touch on that last point, is that a lot of times it feels like fighters and coaches in specific matchups will try and play the safe route, or go the safe route, because they feel that rather than put yourself in a position that you could get, you know, take shots, take licks, and put yourself in danger in order to accomplish something that, you know, like you said, if you have to get into a slugfest with Giga, I have confidence you will win that fight. You'll eat your shots, you're going to get hit too. But at the end of the day, that's the best way for us to win the fight, is for us to move forward, knowing that you might take those shots, as opposed to, well, sometimes these fighters just kind of like hang out at range, and it'll be a really slow paced volume kickboxing match that is a split decision, which is not really necessarily the safest way to get the win. So that's kind of actually really interesting that you have that mentality. The last question I actually have is one that always interests me, because I have a really appreciation for fighters who utilize a really versatile and good jab. Rob, Calvin are excellent examples of two fighters who really utilize that in virtually every fight they're in. So when you're, I guess, teaching the jab, but how do you approach utilizing the jab in the context of an MMA fight? What approaches you use to teach it, to hone it, to make it more versatile, offensive, defensive? Please.
Yeah, by no means will I take credit for teaching them a jab. Like, they, you know, Calvin started with like Mickey Ward and his coach, like right out of high school. That was his first boxing coach. They taught him how to jab. Rob, I think, was born knowing how to jab. I think he's just one of those rare people, never boxed. But I remember one of the first MMA rounds he ever did was sparring with me. And after the round, and he didn't know wrestling and jiu-jitsu and all that, but and I was way more experienced than him. But then after the round, I was like, "Hey man, you have like a really good jab." He kept snapping it out and he just hit me in the nose. And I'm like, what the frig? This is little fat guy. Because back then Rob was a little heavier. I'm like, this little fat dude just slapping me with his jab, and I would take him down, you know. But then after the round, I told him, "Hey, you have a really good jab." And he's got good reach for his division. He's got really big hands, and he's got good mechanics on the jab, and that's natural. You know, he just had that instinctively from like slap boxing with his friends in the backyard. He was fortunate enough to have good technique doing it. I'll always use the line is like, I'm not going to fix your jab, but I'm going to tell you when to jab. You know, we have a boxing coach. He's great. Sean Farley. He works on all that stuff with them. But like then when it comes to like the game planning, what to throw when, all that stuff. And like, there's some fights where our plan is like, we're not going to leverage the jab. We're going to let the jab come out when it needs to come out. But everybody that we fight is going to have a plan for our jab. They're going to spend 8 weeks saying, when they jab, we do this. But what happens when you come out and 3 minutes into the fight, we haven't thrown a jab? Then they're like confused. And next thing you know, they're worried about the other stuff. And then now the jab's landing, and it's so it's like, it's doing giving different looks and knowing how to leverage the jab and let it come out naturally. Because last thing, like, again, it comes back to momentum. If we come out and the first thing we throw is a jab, when we know for 8 weeks they've had a plan for it, they're going to be like, here, I'm waiting for the jab. And then all of a sudden you do it and then they execute their plan. Now they have confidence. They have momentum. Maybe we're reluctant to throw the jab again. Well, every time I jab, he does this. It's like, so it's just being creative about how to pull those tools out and how to almost assume what the other camp's going to do and have a plan for it. And there's a lot of that goes in, but then there's also a lot of just like, these guys have probably 2 of the best jabs in all of MMA. Like let them do their thing with it, So it's a balance of those 2 philosophies, and meeting somewhere in the middle, we've had a lot of success with it.
Well, definitely have had a lot of success with it, and a lot of success with Calvin and Rob, and I'm looking forward to seeing them both again. I'm sure that you have some other fighters, obviously, that are hopefully we're going to be seeing coming up. I did see that you posted about the 2 fighters that you said are coming up in like 6 weeks that are fighting. They were drilling together, some wrestling. So you have some younger fighters, I assume, in the camp that are going to be coming up, and can't wait to see that. Before we sign off, tell everyone where they can find you, they can reach out to you, send some support, and so you talk about fighting.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
Instagram's usually the easiest way. It's Tyson_Chartier. If you want any New England Cartel swag, the link's in my bio. That's our online store. We appreciate all the support there. And then, I think we get some fights coming up, like a bunch of local fights. I always post about them on Instagram. So if you want to check those out, and we'll keep you guys pretty updated on who's fighting and when, and just appreciate the support, and on to the next fight, right?
Definitely. Tyson, I really, really appreciate you coming on. It was awesome. It was a really insightful interview. You're clearly an excellent coach, and can't wait to see what you continue to show with your fighters. So thank you everyone for listening, and have a great night.
Thanks, buddy.